All right. I probably didn't time it right, but we're going to give it a whirl. Tuesday, NFL strategy show from awesemo.com. As you can see, I am not Lofty, subbing in. Ben Razza here with Sal Vetri. How you doing, man?
Doing well, man. Looking forward to the first show together. I'm excited.
First show. Yeah, it's exciting. Good stuff. I'm glad I could weasel, Lofty had to do some things, so I was happy to hop on. Yeah, first show, week 16. It took us long enough, but we made it. And it's a good one. Obviously, we're going to get into the slate. We'll see if we can squeeze some Saturday talk in. I know I had a few people ask what we're going to do there, but right off the top, I want to talk about Yahoo, our sponsor for the show. Obviously, right now, doing big things over there. They've got CSV upload, which is one of the new things. Makes it so much easier to get those lineups in, and that's for so many people who MMA a huge boost. You can claim up to $30 in Yahoo Sports reward points, YSRPs as we call them, by signing up and using the promo code AWESEMO. You can use the link in articles that we will drop. And like I said, great place to grind a bankroll. So we really do encourage that. I also have one other thing, and then we'll get into it. We have a free giveaway today on Twitter, and it's an NHL giveaway. So a $280 value. All you got to do, you go there, reply to the tweet on the Awesemo homepage, guess the player that scores the most fantasy points tonight on the NHL slate. One random winner will be drawn from the correct answers. It's a free roll. I would not win. I can only name about 5 guys in the NHL, so I would be out. But definitely go and check that out. And then you never know. So we've got that going for us. But I wanted to ask you right off the top, Sal, are you a fan of having like a 3-gamer like we have on Thanksgiving, like we have on Saturday? Or are you more like, give me the Thursday, give me the Monday showdown type slates?
Yeah, I think I like the change up. If it was for like the entire season, I think I would favor actually having those showdown slates right now, because the showdown slates can be frustrating, and there might arguably, depending on the edge you can find in them, but I do think they're relatively soft. I mean, you see some people in the industry just crushing them right now, but it's nowhere near how many people are just attacking these bigger slates. So for when it's like a little break, like these Thanksgiving slates, or like this week, I think it's the only one we have Saturday this year, but I do like them occasionally. But like if it was season long, if this was every single week, I would prefer showdowns.
I think I'm the same way. It's a cool change of pace. I do like, it's kind of like the afternoon slates that we get, but it's not as much of a scramble just because we have some time. But I don't think I'd want to see this type of slate every single week. The other thing I wanted to ask you just real quick, do you have anything you want to mention about week 15? I know we didn't do a show last Tuesday, obviously, but what did you make of the last week that we just saw in the NFL?
Yeah, I thought so. Personally, was a fine week for me. I had a very tight player pool relative to most weeks, mainly at running back and tight end. So I think that helped when all the main running backs end up doing really well for you. You had Kenyon Drake as like a surprise guy. Perriman kind of popped off as somewhat of a surprise. Some people might have expected him to at least produce well, but other than that, all the guys who were scoring 20 plus and really in winning lineups were guys you would expect to be there. Ownership was pretty spread out. So I thought it was a fine week. Kenyon Drake was the obvious standout, but not many of those.
Yeah, I mean, he was someone I certainly did not get to. But I managed to squeak through just fine. Julio really saved me. Came on ridiculously strong. Higby tried to derail it, but for the most part, yeah, I thought it was that type of week where the high end running backs really performed, especially in the 1 p.m. slate, and then you had to have someone like Perryman, Jameis, those type of stacks certainly to really connect. But pretty decent week, and now we move on to week 16. So as I mentioned right off the top, we have 3 games Saturday. We've got 12 games on the Sunday main slate. That's what we're going to focus on. Where do you want to start? This is your show. Do we go QB first? You want to start with the running backs? How do you want to do it?
Yeah, we could start at QB and just kind of work the way through running back, wide receiver, tight end.
All right, let's do it. So we've got Lamar kicking us off. No surprise there. And then, obviously we'll work down. But I guess I've been doing this on almost every show. He's to me almost a binary question. Like, do you start with Lamar? Do you like him this week? Or do we want to open it up and pay down and save some money?
Yeah, so I think this week I really just like the mid to low K. It's so early, but the 6K range. And Lamar, yeah, I mean, worth touching on. 10-point favorite here, as you would expect them to be, but just huge price point of $8,000 on him now. And it almost doesn't matter if he hits his ceiling, because we've seen it now being 35 plus points. But if he's not hitting that, there's going to be a lot of other QBs, probably 5, that are going to float between that 20 to 26, 27 point range this week. So I don't think he's a priority this week at all. He'll be in player pools of mine, but I wouldn't be shocked if he's like a fifth or sixth owned guy for me.
I'm in a similar boat. You mentioned it. For him to really, it's almost like Christian McCaffrey. For him to really kill you, he has to do something outrageous. Now, can he do that? Of course he can, with the way he runs the ball. But if he gives you a very quality performance, a 3x on 8K, there's a million other guys that you're probably going to get similar outputs to, and you will save some money. The other thing I do want to point out, and I don't think it's a huge deal, but the Patriots play on Saturday. If the Patriots lose, the Ravens clinch the number 1 seed. So keep an eye on stuff like that. We are at that time of the year. I don't know if that means Lamar will sit, but I don't think it's impossible that the Ravens will shy away from running him out there if they've locked up the 1 seed.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point to bring up as well, with them having just both the tiebreaker and then also right now a game up on the Patriots and the entire rest of the field 2 games up on them.
Absolutely. So, I know you just mentioned you like kind of that next range. Are you looking at guys like Matt Ryan, Kyler, that type of range? Because that's really where I've kind of honed in at first glance.
Yeah, so I kind of go through, at first glance, and I'll put like a Y for a yes, an X for a maybe, and an N for a no just to start the week and go from there. And the only yeses that I have on players right now starts at Dak and ends at Fitzpatrick. So those 4 right in a row. So Dak, Ryan, Murray, and Fitzpatrick. And I like them all right now. I think that those first 2 stand out a little bit more for me. So you see with the Eagles, they had about a 3-week span of looking nice on defense, but I think it was just a small sample within the small sample of the NFL season already. And since then, they haven't looked that great. They just made Dwayne Haskins, a guy who his own team doesn't want him throwing the ball 30 times. They made him look pretty good in that one. So I do like Dak this week. Amari's been dealing with an injury. It seems pretty obvious to me. So that's a big concern, but he didn't even need Amari last week in the first half. Dallas's offense put up 4 touchdowns. Their offensive line is just a great neutralizer. Dak remains so efficient. You had a top 5 defensive line in the Rams last week, and it seemed like they were one of the worst defensive lines in the league because Dak had all day to throw. So he stands out. And then, Matt Ryan, even without Ridley, Julio ends up getting those 20 targets. Jacksonville defense is a shell of itself, and Ryan's averaging the most attempts on the slate at 40 per game right now. So I'll take those 2 guys probably over most of this field right now at quarterback to start the week.
Yeah, I mean, Matt Ryan back in the dome as he basically is, it seems like every week. He lack of receivers, but that's not going to stop them against. I'll go on a rant about the Raiders later in the show at some point. How they lost to the Jaguars is a disgrace, but Dak's got a Q tag. I don't worry about that at all. It's a finger issue. You mentioned he's fine. He's ready to go. That's basically a playoff game. Them and the Eagles. Dallas does come in slight favorite on the road, and we've seen the Eagles secondary is just not good. I know they've shown, as you mentioned, some signs here and there, but if you take a macro view, they should have success there. So I totally agree. I know you mentioned you like Kyler, and I do too. I still have trouble with him just because I thought his rushing would be a little more sustained throughout the year. We know he can run the ball, 8 carries for 56 yards against Cleveland last week. Do you worry about the matchup with Seattle's defense? Do you think maybe that makes him run even more? Or do you think overall it's just an easy price point to attack?
Yeah, so I think it's the price point for sure. And then I actually do like the matchup for him on the ground. So, on the season, it's really sporadic, but around 40 yards per game. In some games, he'll have 6 yards, and some he'll have those 50, 60-yard performances. But this is one where I would lean on it, leaning average to maybe above, just because of Seattle's defensive line, at least pressuring the quarterback right now, ranks coming into last week, they were second worst in the league. So I'm going to assume still bottom 5. They were without their top 2 of their 3 pass rushers in Jadeveon Clowney last week and Ziggy Ansah. We'll see how that goes. But I was tracking it for the first 8 weeks of the season in terms of bottom 5 pass rushes against quarterbacks' mobility. And there was just a positive correlation for rushing stats. Now, a little bit skewed because Lamar was one of those quarterbacks against the Bengals. But I think this is a good spot for Kyler Murray. And the rushing upside is, in my opinion, going to be right around that average or above average.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then the last guy you touched on was Ryan Fitzpatrick. A pretty easy case to make. The Bengals 30th DVOA against the pass, just a bad team. Ryan Fitzpatrick leading the Dolphins in rushing. I've heard that this week. That's insane. It just shows how bad their backfield is right now. But we know he's going to give you probably around 40 passing attempts. He's going to chip in with some rushing upside. I totally get that play. Anything to add to him before we move down? Because there are a couple cheaper options I want to get to.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, he's the last 6 weeks, I believe, 37 is the least pass attempts he's gone for. He has the mobility there as well. So at that price range, he's just somebody that I'm fine getting to.
So as we work down, obviously there's a drop off, some just bad quarterbacks, some tougher matchups. I want to just ask you a couple guys, and obviously feel free to, anyone I missed. Do you have any thoughts on Phillip Rivers? He's at home against Oakland, who, like I said, Gardner Minshew had success in some spots last week. I know Rivers has had a bad year, but 5,700 on DraftKings, pretty reasonably priced across the industry. Do you have any thoughts on the Chargers, Cube?
Yeah, so I have him as a maybe right now, and like real life wise, it's a concern, like what his ceiling possibly can be. Jacksonville had a good game, as many teams have for the past month and a half to 2 months. That was 2 weeks ago, but I mean the turnovers are an issue for real life. I think it's way too late in the season for them to even consider benching him though. So if he goes out and throws another 3 interceptions, like he's done 3 out of, I believe, his last 5 games, then it's really not a concern for fantasy purposes. So yeah, I think he's still okay here. It's a matchup where they could get the ground game going in Melvin Gordon for a 20 carry game or so. But I just like the overall weapons around him. We'll get to wide receivers, but I'm pretty heavy on, or at least a lot of interest in Keenan Allen this week. And when that happens, I'll usually get more of his quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, they're at home, 6-point favorite, over under 45.5, pretty healthy across the board. They should move the ball. Can they control it on the ground? Sure, but Rivers, honestly, he should have plenty of opportunities to be effective against a Raiders team that is as lifeless as they come. We're going to anyone else, because there's one guy, and I'll just tell you who it is, and Chad has mentioned him already. It's Will Greer, who's in a price point that we basically never see. But before we get there, is there anyone else that you want to throw out as a flyer who has piqued your interest?
Yeah, before we get to Greer, because I have him here too. Gardner Minshew, just 5,500 against Atlanta. Surprisingly, maybe not surprising though, third highest rushing yards per game on the slate right now. He's getting about 25 per game there. He should get, well, actually, maybe it shouldn't be a should, but early in the week, DJ Shark is cutting and running, so that's a good sign for his status. You have Minshew at this price point, has some upside, especially based on the matchup here. So Jags have a positive offensive line matchup as well. So even though Atlanta's pressure has been picking up a little bit, it's still not going to get there as much as average.
Yeah, and I think we've seen, Fournette is going to get a ton of work, but there's no way in my mind that the Jaguars can control games on the ground. They're 7.5-point dog here in the dome. I'd be shocked if Minshew wasn't there in a volume perspective. So on that alone, you can definitely look to him. But I do want to bring up, of course, I know Will Greer is a polarizing situation here. So the Panthers have made the move. They want to see what he can do coming out of West Virginia. He is, I want to make sure I get this right, he is $4,300 on DraftKings. I mean, it's hard not to at least consider it. That's just a price point we never say.
Yeah, I mean, so right now, early in the week, he's at least interesting and probably more than interesting for me, at least talking cash games. In tournaments, I'll see where it goes from there. But if you just look at Kyle Allen, what he was doing in this offense, aside from throwing interceptions and fumbling, I mean, this guy was averaging like 3 turnovers per game for like the last 5 or 6 weeks. So they just had to pull the plug at this point on him, probably their backup moving forward. But he's been throwing, I mean, the last 3 games, 41, 41, 46 times. There was a 50 burger in there 2 weeks before that. So a ton of passing attempts. And a lot of that is just an extension of the run to McCaffrey. So that helps the quarterback. The problem for me is just the matchup against the Colts. They'll let you get in there for the dink and diming to McCaffrey, Ian Thomas, Curtis Samuel, if he ever lines up in the slot and they're using him more as a gadget player. So that definitely helps just keeping these drives alive. But the Colts do limit big plays. They have been nice against the quarterback. But at the same time, yeah, you touched on the price point. It's almost like a minimum price player in the NBA. It's 4,300 at the quarterback position. And the guy might throw, based on how this offense has been going, a minimum of 35 times, probably closer to 40. So yeah, I definitely have interest in all formats, probably more so in cash. And if anything, it makes me like just all these pieces of Carolina that are in the short passing game, like Ian Thomas if he plays, or Olsen, and definitely McCaffrey even more than I usually would.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. The Colts, they're pretty notorious keeping everything in front of them. But I think for a quarterback, this guy's a rookie. I've seen him more than most just because I watch a ton of college football. I actually think it's a positive type of matchup in the sense that, let him get settled in. He doesn't need to really try to beat this team over the top. He's got weapons underneath. He can lean on McCaffrey. And at 4,300, this is a rare time where even if he's not super effective, he can just get there on a volume standpoint, even dinking and dunking. If he can give you anything rushing, anything, that is massive at that price tag. It's going to free up a ton. The question I have, and I mean, we can kind of transition right into running back if you want to with this question, is do you think he's basically like an auto pair with McCaffrey himself, just the nature of the matchup?
Yeah, so if you're playing in GPPs and you wanted to pair them together, I'm fine with it. I don't think that I'll have to go there automatically just because the other pieces of this team. But McCaffrey just aims to be outside of tight ends if Olsen's in or not. Then Ian Thomas, just a main benefactor of this guy coming in here. But you also had Kyle Allen. Anytime that there was pressure, and due to this offensive line, they were facing pressure a lot. He was already dumping it off to McCaffrey at a much higher clip than Cam Newton would have if he was healthy. So I don't think it's the biggest upgrade for McCaffrey. It just adds more stability to those like 8 target games instead of seeing it maybe spike down to 6. But yeah, heading over to running back, McCaffrey at 10-1. There's another guy that we'll get to really quick that I probably want more of, but at 10-1, I'm completely fine in this matchup, getting to as much McCaffrey as I do. Last week, I came in a little bit lower than usual. I was around 18%, which is pretty much the field. If I see around 20%, I wouldn't be shocked.
That was the one guy that I was pretty nervous, from a personal level. I was underweight and he was teetering on smashing the slate. You survived, I think, if you faded him, and if you had him, you felt pretty good. It was one of those middling performances where everyone kind of felt happy, but he's shown, and yeah, when he sees these targets and he consistently is basically, 10 is almost the median outcome right now. I don't think Will Grier changes that output much, if at all, and he's on an island price wise. So you're going to have money to get to him. I have no problem doing that. But as we work down, I'll just rattle off some names and I'll pass it right back to you. We've got guys like Chris Carson, Saquon, Zeke, Derrick Henry at home in a huge game for them, then Kamara and Fournette. What do you make of kind of the next tier after McCaffrey?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of these guys in this upper tier are right now coming as just secondary interest based on price point or matchup. And really because of Saquon, where he is, he's probably my priority interest, at least paying up for a second straight week here. You see what's happening with Washington. So about a month ago, they started to lose some defensive linemen due to injuries. Then 2 weeks ago against the Packers, they lose Ryan Kerrigan, a linebacker. Aaron Jones and the Packers offense just run all over them. Last week, Miles Sanders has his career game as a rookie. Boston Scott even has a good game. This Washington defensive line is just absolutely brutal and banged up. The Giants' run blocking unit is pretty average, so it shouldn't be anything that they can't control the game. So I think Saquon at 8,300, coming off of the best game yet. The ownership is surely going to be there. It's just a matter of how high and does it become an issue in tournaments. But at 8,300, he stands out to me as just the guy that I want to pay up for the most.
I think I'm with you. It's funny, if you told me you liked any of these guys, of course you can justify it because they're, top running backs in the league, but not one of them really stood out where I was just like, all right, this is a great spot. Last week we had, Saquon against the Dolphins. Chris Carson was in a really good spot. This week, I mean, it's not the worst spot for any of these guys, but it's kind of middling when you look at, the DVOA against the run ranks. So I may look to them here and there kind of just to mix and match. The guy I do want to ask you about, though, is Derrick Henry. The Titans couldn't get it done against the Texans at home. We know he's going to touch the ball probably 20 plus times, and it's basically all going to be on the ground. Are you going to attack him at home against the Saints front, which is not really the best matchup, on paper?
Yeah, on paper, not a good matchup at all. I think right now Saints are just top 5 in run defense, and you have a middle of the pack run blocking team in Tennessee, although they'll just force the issue a little bit. At 7,700, the price point does come down, and he continues to be fine with the volume that he's getting. It didn't seem like he was all that limited. Still saw 20-plus carries last week in a game they were trailing for most of the second half. Right now, I have him in as closer to a no in this price range. Have more interest in just guys like Zeke, Saquon, as I touched on, and then even a little bit lower with Fournette. But it is a must-win. I think if they lose, are they eliminated? Because
I think so.
I think they might need Houston to win. I know if they go into the final week, if Houston wins or they lose, it's over. Because if they split the final week game, even if they beat Houston in that game, Houston still takes the division on tiebreakers. So I think I think this is pretty much a must-win game for them either way. But I think it's actually do or die. So yeah, I think right now at 7,700, he's probably a guy to just get away from at the end of the day. Just a pass catching role at that point. Put some of these other guys like Fournette for a little bit cheaper ahead of him right now.
Fair enough. And for what it's worth, not that this is the end all be all, Vegas is giving them, this is a virtual pick 'em. They're a slight, I saw like a 1-point dog for the Titans, which is, they're giving them a real shot. And I think they do have a real shot in this game, but we know with Derrick Henry, it really can get away from them if they drop back and Tannehill has to start throwing. That's not his strength. Can he do it? Sure. But they want to run the ball ad nauseum, honestly. So I'm with you there. I like Fournette as well. We mentioned that's just a good matchup for everyone involved in that Falcons-Jags game. He's got no competition for a backup. they're going to give him the ball in the passing game if they're behind, and if they're running the ball, it's going to be with him. So I don't mind that. I know I'm working down a little, so feel free to talk about guys like Chubb and Ingram. But you know me, if you've watched any of my shows, Joe Mixon each and every week. This is a spot, man. I really like him against the Dolphins.
Yeah, I like Mixon too. You see the price point coming up, but it's something that I was saying all week, well, really all season long, was last week, that the matchup that he had, obviously brutal because they were such big underdogs, but New England's not really that good against the run, and it's kind of just being masked up right now because they're just in so many positions where teams can't run on them. But the Bengals kept the first half close, and in the second half, they were completely fine, just still running the ball with Mixon. He ends up getting 28 total touches last week. So yeah, the workload's just there for this guy. I mean, you haven't seen less than, I believe, what is it now? Less than 18 total touches in almost like 6 or 7 weeks. So you're getting the workload. You're getting the great matchup against Miami. Yeah, $6,600 Mixon. He's the cheapest guy right now for me where I go and put a yes on him early in the week. The rest are just sort of secondary options to look more into. So I like Mixon there. I echo you on that. And I do like Chubb at 69. You see the price point drop off probably around $1,000 more than what it's been for most of the season. Baltimore's around average against the run. The concern here is that they're just 10-point underdogs, and you might see more Kareem Hunt in the passing game. At 6,900, if he is like 1-2% owned like he was last week, I'll probably have more than the field.
Yeah, that's a really interesting game. And one, like I said, I will wait and see what New England does. I do expect at home they'll probably hold serve, but I think it's very possible again that if they lost, the Ravens would maybe sub out some of those defenders and get them less reps. And it's a long way. They're going to have a bye. That'd be 3 weeks off. So maybe I'm wrong on that. But yeah, Chubb is shown. I mean, he's leading the league in rushing. I didn't know that until I just heard it recently. He's been great. Now, Kareem Hunt, as you mentioned, if they fall behind and Cleveland is dysfunctional, Kareem is going to get some work, and that can vulture some of Chubb's opportunities. You can still look there, especially in tournaments. Not sure I'm going to go there in cash. So then working down, that next tier below Mixon, we've got guys like Miles Sanders coming off the huge game. Marlon Mack against maybe the worst rush defense in the league in the Panthers. You got guys like Eckler, Le'Veon Bell at 5,800. My God, revenge game too. What do you make of the mid-range running backs this week?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So like there's top end guys that I have a lot of interest in. And then similar to last week, it's top end interest and then wide receivers where I find some of the value. This week, I think you have a ton of value. It's just which ones you prioritize more. And really everything at Miles Sanders, if there's no Howard, from Miles Sanders and below, Sanders might be a little bit priced up, but we saw last week what he can do, and Dallas has struggled against versatile backs. But Sanders' $6,400 price tag, all the way down to Kareem Hunt at $5,500. I have interest in virtually every single running back in that range, and it's like 8 guys. I mean, you can go through it. Kenyon Drake has a bit of a tougher matchup against Seattle, but he's been showing over the last few weeks to just take over that backfield ahead of David Johnson. Edmonds last week doesn't get any touches for the second week out of the last 3. Marlon Mack, you said, against the Panthers, they've been brutal. Worst team against running backs this season, according to DVOA, in just the last 6 weeks. Most rushing yards allowed, most rushing touchdowns. The question is, since Mack has kind of came back, there have not been giving him as big of a load working him back into it. Also, just the game flow, them being down big in some of these games doesn't help either. So that's a question. I think the guy that I prioritize the most out of this range right now for me probably ends up being Mack to start the week at 6,200, and then Kareem Hunt all the way down at 5,500. Again, 10-point underdog. I think you see a little bit of an inflated workload there for him. You're relying mainly on the passing game, so it's a little bit of a risk and more probably a GPP play.
Yeah, Mac, it's a good point. Now, he broke his hand right on the goal line. He came back. But since then, I don't know if it's a product like, you take last night. I don't really read much into that in terms of Marlon Mack being ineffective. The game, they were down 30-0 immediately. Obviously, that's not the script for him, and his carries were just ineffective. There's no doubt about it. This is a totally different situation. Yeah, I echo your thoughts on Kareem Hunt. What do you make of the Chargers, guys? Now, we know Eckler, it's amazing. He has the ability to get there basically as he's like Tariq Cohen with how they utilize him. Then we have Melvin Gordon on the ground who should do damage against the Raiders. Both pretty appealing price tags. Are you going to stay away? Do you lean to one over the other? What do you make of it?
Yeah, I have Eckler right now as a good GPP play to just start the week because from what I'm just going to expect, and we'll see what happens tomorrow, there'll be no ownership on him after he has the huge week. Then he drops down after the whole offense falls apart. I think the Chargers had 7 turnovers on Sunday. So just a brutal game for them. Like Phillip Rivers, I think he had 4 or 5 total for him, fumbles and interceptions. So if they actually stay within a game, bottom half of the league defense in Oakland, especially against the run and pass catching running backs, I do like Eckler as a tournament play. Melvin Gordon, yeah, he just falls into this range of guys I have some interest in. and have to probably break more down into. I think it's a game more so where you see him get those 20 carries or so, and probably Eckler more involved in the passing game. The script right now plays out to be more neutral, so I could go really either way with those guys. I think I lean more Eckler.
Yeah, it's something where for me secondary factors come into play, ownership, what the spread with the game flow, because in the right circumstances, I could find myself going to both Melvin or Eckler on different teams with different lineup constructions. Kind of similar to Le'Veon. I'm interested to see what he comes in at ownership wise. It's a really tough matchup. The Steelers have been fantastic. Big game for them. Jets, though, I mean, my old Jets, they can put up a fight here and there. He should see work. 5,800, I'll be lying if I said I have no interest. I still think the matchup keeps me somewhat tempered, though.
Yeah, actually, I probably will end up having more interest than I originally thought looking into it. Yeah, the matchup's brutal. I think I'm looking right now. Steelers, right now ranked still second against the run, only to Denver on PFF. So, it's a brutal matchup. You had a better matchup than expected against the Ravens last week. They end up getting blown out or the most part, second half at least of that game. But he still got the 21 touches. And as long as the games stay close here, like they were blown out for 3 straight weeks now, but held it close and relatively close in the first half against Baltimore. So he got to those 23 total touches. As long as the game stays close, he's going to get his 18 to 20 touches in this game, which is encouraging. It's just a matter of can they actually move the ball anywhere near the red zone, because you're probably relying on at least some sort of touchdown to hit a GPP winning score. But at 5,800, it doesn't have to do too much for you with the volume he's getting. So yeah, he's somebody that I'll probably have increased interest in and have to look more into.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with him, they got to get him. He has one of two outs. He either needs to get a McCaffrey-like target share, which has not been the case for most of the year, even though I don't really understand why Darnold doesn't look to him more in the passing game, or he has to score. Now, he only has 4 touchdowns, and it's a tough ask, but he does have a couple different outs. And this salary, 1 touchdown is going to do it. This is not where it's, he's 8,500 and we need a monster day. If he can get going and find the end zone, he will return fine value for you in the mid-range. But, you mentioned kind of this list right to Kareem Hunt, but now for me, it drops off really quickly. I really don't have a ton, and I'm interested to see if you've identified anyone as we work to the true salary savers at running back that piqued your interest.
Yeah, I have so there's that huge range like we just talked about, and then I have everybody else down in this range is a no. The one that I would point out would be Adrian Peterson. The price point did come up to 5K, so that's the reason I'm probably not getting there. And then we'll kind of see what the news is on Kerryon Johnson. It's just they expect him to be back this week. It's the most difficult matchup according to PFF on the ground against Denver, so it's not that appealing. And also this backfield has like 5 or 6 running backs that they could possibly throw out there depending on health. So I don't know how positive I am that Kerryon comes back and even gets more than 10 or 12 total touches. So just a lot of interesting things down here. You can go back to Patrick Laird if you want in a good matchup, although he started to lose some of the workload to Gaskin, who they did spend the draft pick and draft capital on. So maybe you see more of that moving forward to close out the year. Yeah, not a lot down here right now.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, Peterson, who you kind of know what you're getting. He's not going to give you much in the targets. He needs to score, but he's got a touchdown in 3 straight games, and he's at home against the Giants team that, he can keep that rolling. They're going to give him work on the ground. Chris Thompson not really getting enough, in my opinion, to be viable. Patrick Laird, yeah, he killed a lot of people last week. Gaskin is a guy I'm sure that the Dolphins want to get a look to. But man, there's just not much down here. I think for me, I'm going to attack that mid-range. You're not paying, because the problem with, a situation like this, if I'm interested in say Peterson, I'm just going to find the extra $500 to $800 and pick from one of the 5 guys that you mentioned. There's so many options right above them that to me are in a different tier of output.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it'll be an interesting week for lineup construction. It just seems like paying up a running back and a lot of cheap value receivers. But in terms of getting different in tournaments, if that's how it ends up being, this whole 6K range is filled from the top to the bottom with guys who can produce a 20, 30-point score. I mean, we've seen multiple of these guys do it last week. So we didn't even start to talk about guys like James Conner at 6,500. So there's just that whole range is really appealing. Could be a week where you see 2 of them in winning lineups.
Definitely, yeah, mixing and matching there. And as Chat pointed out, the Vikings have no running backs left if Cook sits. They are not on the main slate, though. So Monday night, you're going to see that Boone character massively owned in Showdown, if that's the case. But we're not going to go there. Anything else on running back before we hit the pass catchers?
No, I think that's all.
All right, beautiful. So I tell you what, man, I watched a little of it last night. Michael Thomas really is unbelievable. He is a dangerous man, and he does lead us off 9,300. But man, God, it's unbelievable. And we've got Julio, Lockett, H.A. Brown. What a world. So I'll just pass it to you. What do you make of the top range with Michael Thomas and the other elite players?
Yeah, you touched on it. Michael Thomas is just like a thrill to watch. Most consistent receiver, maybe since he's come into the league now for 3 straight years. So I think starting all the way up top, it's something that I'll echo from weeks. I believe it was 11 when he was 9,900 and week 12 when he was 93 on the main slates. And then you get the Thanksgiving slate is expensive, but it's okay in a smaller slate. Ends up only putting up 10 that week. But those week 11 and 12 price points, he ends up going for 28 and 29. He wasn't needed in any of the top end winning tournaments that week, whether it's the Millie or the $3 or the slant, whatever it might have been, and he's putting up nearly 30 points. So he kind of has to do what he did last night and get closer to the 35, 40 point range. So at $9,300, I did it those weeks, and I ended up having just no Michael Thomas. And it does sound scary, and it surely is in terms of GPPs, but just it's an opportunity cost thing. If Julio is $1,300 less, and I think he can put up a similar score week in and week out, maybe not on a much consistent basis, but when he gets the matchups, including this one, I'm just going to go to those guys in the cheaper end more. So I prefer Julio. If you go down more into this range, it really just drops off a cliff. I don't have much more interest until probably the 6K range in guys.
So it's funny you say that because I've been doing a lot of the same stuff with Michael Thomas this year. A couple weeks I hedged it where I had him in cash and really came in underweight in tournaments just because his floor is so good. But you know what? It is. You see these again. I'll reference Christian McCaffrey. I know it's scary to fade that week in and week out, but unless they break the slate, you can get by. And when you're seeing scores this year, if you want to talk a large field tournament, like 250 sometimes is what you need. It is very hard, especially if there's not a lot of cheap value, for you to get there. If someone like Michael Thomas gives you like 25, that's not going to kill you, but it's certainly not getting you there either. So it is an opportunity cost thing. Julio, yeah, I'll tell you, if he sees 20 targets again, clearly my preferred option. And with Ridley on IR, I mean, do you think that's feasible? Because I really do think that he's going to be in for massive target share once again.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like his target share from Sunday, if you cut it in half, I would think that would be a low number for what his projected targets will be come week 16. So like a 10 target share is something that you could probably think and project pretty handily. This Jacksonville defense has been atrocious. I would be shocked if AJ Boye, they put him on any sort of single coverage with Julio, but you saw it this past weekend, any sort of double coverage, even triple coverage at times with two guys on the line of scrimmage and a safety, it really doesn't matter. So I think they'll keep force feeding this guy the ball. There's just not as much chemistry. Austin Hooper went out for a little bit. He's surely on Matt Ryan's radar, but Russell Gage, a newer receiver in that offense. Christian Blake played like 85% of the snaps for the Falcons and didn't have a single reception in the last game. He's just leaning on the guys that he trusts, and now an even better matchup. Yeah, Julio at 8,000 in this range of like, there's only a couple of them now, 7,000 or above receivers. He's probably the one who stands out the most.
I found it interesting. Yeah, there's only four, on DraftKings, there's only four receivers, 7K or more, two in the 7K range. Julio is flat 8K, and he's the only one, and then Michael Thomas. So it's interesting. They kind of incentivize you. You're probably going to have a balanced portfolio for the most part at receiver. I do want to mention Lockett, who I always have trouble getting to. I'll be honest. He rarely sees crazy amounts of targets. He's incredibly efficient. He had a big game last week against Carolina. We know, Josh Gordon, unfortunately, not there anymore. What do you make of Lockett against this Cardinals secondary?
Yeah, it's a great matchup. I mean, the Cardinals still rank last in pass defense. In the slot, they're dead last as well. So that's where exactly Lockett will be for almost all of his snaps, at least 80% of them, right around there. We'll actually see that 80% might be a little bit less now. So since Josh Gordon being released or stepping away at this point, I think you might actually end up seeing Tyler Lockett move a little bit more to the outside, just early week thoughts there, and then going into more two wide receiver sets predominantly. So that'll be interesting to kind of see how that folds out. Maybe only get 60% of the slot snaps for Lockett. Just hurts his floor type points a little bit more receptions. 7,600, it's a steep price point. It's a secondary interest at best. Probably something that'll be dictated on ownership for me. But that stack in general of a Wilson and Lockett and Metcalf against Arizona is in a really good spot.
I'm not sure how much I'll get to either. Yeah, I mean, I said this about Tyreek Hill, and he's an easier example to make. If Lockett comes in for some reason very low owned, I will take a small leverage and be content because I'm not going to jam him in by any stretch. I don't think I could get over if he's chalk, but it's hard to have 0% of this guy either because the way he can get it done, and you mentioned Arizona, not the worst in terms of matchup. Seattle at home, I think will have success. I'm not sure I can say the same thing about AJ Brown, though. This price point is really climbing. I know he's been incredibly impressive with Tannehill. To me, though, this might be the top of the mountain. I have a feeling I come in underweight.
Yeah, I think I do too. We actually saw the volume last week, and most of it, because they were trailing, just wasn't on play action passing, where you saw was a lot of their success before that with Henry. Them trailing, just going straight drop back. So it was good to see Brown was dominating his matchups. Just not of interest at this point for me there. And yeah, it's really just Julio in this range. Honestly, the more I look into it, I didn't know they were such big favorites, but Seattle has 10-point favorites. It's really echoing what week 3 was, where I think it was week 3. It might have been week 4 against Arizona when they were in Arizona. It was a chalky Seattle stack. I don't think with these price points it'll be chalky, but if they get up ahead by anywhere near that number of 10, they're just going to pound the ball with Carson, and you're going to get what you got last week where Wilson throws 25 times, and it's really hard for anybody to get there in these price points. So I think the more we talk about this, I don't like paying the 9,300, and I probably still won't for Thomas, but there's not as much opportunity cost, at least at the top end of wide receiver, if you wanted to.
No, you're going to have options. It's more to me the opportunity cost of, do you want to take McCaffrey and another top end running back? Do we want to spend up? We haven't talked about tight end. We certainly will. It's not going to come to a receiver, though. I agree with you. If you don't want Julio, and you're like, you're going to be working down, because Lockett, AJ Brown are not guys that I'm super interested in. We know DJ Moore. We have the Will Grier question. I guess that's worth asking. I mean, what do you think about him? McCaffrey's targets, I think, are a lot safer. Do you worry about DJ Moore just not being able to get the ball?
Yeah, I guess the concern here would be like how they're just going to have a connection with Grier. If not, the way they're using Samuel just leads me to believe that just by pure necessity that DJ Moore should still see the same target share. Samuel's being used as sort of like a gadgety guy right now, similar to maybe the likes of like Tavon Austin's and Ty Montgomery when he was with the Packers in the past. Just really just a gadget receiver, a really poor man's Tyreek Hill at this point. So it's interesting to see how that will go about. But if Moore's going to be running most of the intermediate to deeper routes, I think he'll still be in play. But there is question marks for 6,900 to get there. I think I'd rather just lean to some of the guys a little bit cheaper. And the main one being Devontae Parker. You see 2 more touchdown grabs last week, 70 yards. He's just a priority right now for me on this slate. He was last week. Price point was 6,400, comes up to 6,800. It seems like it's getting more expensive, but it's cheaper than where it was 3 weeks ago. And the production outside of getting injured hasn't fallen off a cliff at all. So, Devontae Parker in a great matchup against Cincy at home. You look at this slate right now, and if you're not getting to Julio, just by nature of it, $6,800 Parker for me stands out as like the next best option. And automatically you're kind of spending up a running back at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, of course, this is only Tuesday and we'll see where things fall, but Fitzpatrick, Parker, Mixon type, maybe add in one more Dolphin, certainly going to be part of my lineups this week when I imagine what I want to do. And then at the beginning of the show, you mentioned Amari Cooper. Last week, of course, they were just rolling. He was not needed at all. In the games where they were playing awful against Chicago and Buffalo, he was a little more involved out of necessity. This is expected to be a competitive game against the Eagles. Do you like kind of a buy low spot, I guess you could call it, with Cooper?
Yeah, I do. You saw last week, just they were up. They had 28 points at the half. They scored twice in like the last 40 seconds. The Cowboys had just put it up by 4 scores at halftime. And Dak only ends up throwing 23 times, which is about half as much as he's been throwing for the past 2 months. So in that game, you only get 2 targets for Amari. They run the whole second half. The whole fourth quarter is just Tony Pollard running at that point. So if you look back a little bit, you saw those normal volume days of 11 targets versus Buffalo, 8 versus Chicago, and a really good matchup here against Philly. If Dak, and right now it just seems like he's a top interest to start the week of mine, if he ends up being just like a top 3, if not my highest owned quarterback, I'm going to get to just naturally more Amari than I would in stacks. So at 6,700, I think it is a really nice buy low spot in a matchup that we just saw Terry McLaurin and even guys like Steven Sims Jr. with Dwayne Haskins take advantage of.
Yeah, I didn't know that person existed, but here we are. What do you make? So I'm just working down. Kenny Golladay killed me last week. That was probably my biggest mistake. I thought the Lions would have opportunities. Amendola, he salvaged and honestly thrived, but Bilal was unable to get Golladay the ball. I don't love the spot in Denver. You have him and you have T.Y. Hilton, who really was not involved for the most part last night. He did get targets, but couldn't really materialize. Do you have any interest in these guys, or is it Keenan Allen, who you already mentioned?
Yeah, it falls off to Keenan Allen. Yeah, they said that Hilton, if he played last night, was going to be 100%, but I think he only played like 29 snaps, was nowhere near 100%, did see 9 targets, so he was heavily involved when he was on the field, but he definitely was a little bit limited, as you would expect, second, third time this year being out with injury. I think that's an interesting spot, but probably draws Bradbury, which is difficult for him. yeah, it's sort of a dead range. Guys that are injured with Juju and Ridley on IR still there. So I think Keenan Allen at 6,300 stands out as a guy who week in and week out continues to be consistent, whether it's getting in the end zone on like a 6-7 catch day, or last week puts up 10 targets, almost hits 100 yards, misses it by 1 yard. He just stays and remains consistent. And he just, since the beginning of the year when he was popping off, he's still in this mid to low 6K range. I do like it. And we touched on it earlier. Phillip Rivers in a fine spot. You probably just naturally get to more Keenan Allen and stacks. So Keenan Allen at 6,300 last week and the week before, I think he was a guy that I ended up having around 15% of. And I think I'll just probably lock that back in again this week.
I'm going to consider Keenan Allen in cash this week as well. I just think the floor against the Raiders is too good. Either game flow, if the Chargers blow them out, it's hard to imagine he doesn't have a hand in that. If for some reason the Chargers are struggling, it's hard to imagine he's not involved in trying to play catch up. So I think the floor there is really solid when you incorporate that price tag. Then we've got guys, boy, I mean, McLaurin is, I guess, interesting. He really is fantastic. Him and Haskins seem to have something working. He's more of a, you're going to need a bomb, but he's shown he can do that pretty consistently. I don't have strong takes on guys like Sutton, Pascal, Jarvis Landry. As we work down to the low sixes, high fives, anyone that piques your interest?
Yeah, so McLaurin's price point comes up like $1,000. There's no pass rush for the Giants or secondary play. Again, Janoris Jenkins released before last week's game, so it's similar to what you'll get last week in terms of a secondary matchup, if not better, against the Eagles, but with a worse pass rush. So if Haskins got any confidence from that last game, it's a nice spot. But he did survive on a 75-yard touchdown, and that's kind of what you're paying for. So it seems a little bit steep in the price point. Everything else sort of falls off until I get to the high five range of Tyler Boyd at 5,800 against Miami. Coming out of the slot, probably sees Jamal Wiltz. I do like that. And it's another spot where we talked about, you hinted on just the stacking options with Parker and Fitzpatrick. And I think Boyd is another spot that if you're making groups on any optimizer, he would be a guy that you can plug in there and feel pretty confident about.
Yeah, the Bengals, I'm not going to probably get to, John Ross was a guy that I thought you might be able to get sneaky with coming back. That has not materialized at all. So I think it's really Mixon and the obvious, and Boyd. If you're looking for a run back, I don't think I'm going to get too much Dalton at first glance. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm with you there. As you work down, God, I mean, Odell, it's amazing that I've tried to buy so many times in spots like this with him. It's not happening. Christian Kirk is a name. And then I want to ask you specifically, because you like Dak. Do you feel confident in getting some Gallup in there with him, or is it more Amare?
Yeah, I'll start with the Gallup. I think I do. So you just had similar. That whole passing game was just at the mercy of the way the game flow went. He had 3 targets a catch for 6 yards, but again, you had a game where Dak only throws 23 total times instead of his normal 40 to 45 times. So in a really nice matchup, I'm hoping that these just bad wide receiver performances just keep the ownership down on these guys to an extent where no matter how much I get to him above the field on them. But I do like Gallup. I might even like him a little bit more than Amari based on some questions around Amari's health right now. Still seemed like his release was just really slow when I went back and looked at some of it. But I like Gallup in that range. This whole range, once again, similar to running back, this mid 5K range stands out with some nice names, but nothing that really is anything of priority. Kirk's been on the outside a ton over the last month, not really running out of the slot anymore, but still seeing targets. Last week, it kind of just fell off where he was just boxed up. And in this weekend, we'll see what happens with Shaq Griffin. If Shaq Griffin is in, I'll probably get to not too much Kirk. If any, if he's out, I'll get to a little bit more. But the rest of this range is just really secondary options. D.D. Westbrook, if Shark's out again, I'll be fine going back there. Hollywood Brown to get some shares up for big play upside, but none of them are priorities.
Yeah, I'll add in for me, Mike Williams, if I do use Rivers and I want additional Chargers exposure outside of Keenan Allen. That's a big play receiver on the outside. Volume not secure, but he does have some home run ability against an Oakland secondary it's just bad and it's getting worse with every guy that goes down. James Washington, kind of similar. I'd actually have him behind the guys you mentioned, and for me, Mike Williams. But anything, now we're really into the salary savers, kicking it off with Amendola. Anything you find in the 4K range?
Yeah, so the top of this 4K range, you talked about James Washington. I like Deontay Johnson, the other Pittsburgh receiver, 4,700. Just draws a nice matchup against the Jets this week. And it seems like, if anything, since Duck Hodges has taken over out there, that it seems like right now Johnson continues to be sort of the stable number one that he's looking to, especially in third down situations. And this Jets offense or defense should keep them on the field a little bit more. How good the Jets are against the run should limit some of the the all onslaught of just rush attempts that Pittsburgh usually tries to run out there. Maybe you get similar to last week, a game where 30 plus or pass attempts for Duck Hodges. So Johnson is a 4K flyer, I think stands out. And then going down a little bit more, it's more secondary options, nothing too much. John Ross, a little bit of some interest, not a lot. Russell Gage at 4,400 coming out of the slot is sort of the wide receiver 2 now for Atlanta. These are all just guys that you're hoping kind of get into the end zone, but none of them are really secure. I think that DraftKings did a nice job kind of getting away from the flat minimum guys the last couple of weeks, whether it was the Jags guys a few weeks back, last week's the Eagles guys, and just preemptively priced guys into the 4K range. So I don't want to get to them as much.
It was really tough. Greg Ward was so polarizing. I didn't want to play him, but it was hard not to have some exposure to a guy who's going to see like 90% of the snaps at the min. I do want to bring up one last guy, and then we can get on to tight end and then bounce on out of here. If you're looking for more exposure to that Bengals game, Albert Wilson is someone. He got concussed. He came back. He had 8 targets last week, sub 4K. I don't mind him. He's more of a short gadgety guy, but he has some abilities to get in space against the Bengals team that I have no confidence in. So I don't mind him as another way to get some, Fitzpatrick stack exposure.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. And whenever he's on the field and stays on the field for the full game, and it's only been like half the games this year, he usually sees himself out of the slot primarily getting at least like those 5-6 target games, which is nice for 3,800.
Yeah, and at that price, that's all you can ask for, really. It's you just have to roll the dice. Before we get to tight end, I do just want to say real quickly, chat, I appreciate everyone not leaving when you saw it was me and not Lofty. Much appreciated. If you can hit the like button, though, that would help us out a ton. It keeps the lights on, and it really does do a ton for us. So we appreciate it, and we love to bring you the free content. I'll say again real quick, obviously the sponsor, Yahoo, we want you guys to sign up there. Check it out. A different format, different type of competition. And like I said, with CSV Upload now, another way you can practice MME and you get some different competition. And if you're interested in the NHL, we do have the yearly pass giveaway on Twitter. You just have to name that highest scoring player on the 11-game slate. So we do hope you guys will take advantage of some of the stuff. We're going to be doing a lot of things for the holidays. And Lofty wanted me to pass along, stay tuned, because for Saturday, we are planning on providing content for this 3-game slate. So we'll have some updates on that, but we haven't forgot. It's going to be a good one, like a Thanksgiving slate, which are always some of the best out there. All right, now we get to tight end, and we don't have Kittle, but we do have Ertz and we do have Waller. And then we have Mark Andrews, honestly, a cyborg. But what do you make of these top end tight end options? Do you like to pay up there, or do you think you have salary? That's another question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, so I think in a lot of lineups, I think I will, just based on how we just went through wide receiver and where it kind of shakes up. If you're not paying up for really Julio or Thomas on the top end, you're just finding that extra $1,000 or so. So yeah, I have it kind of just separate a little bit here. So I'll get up in spots, and right now my interest is all the way at the top with Ertz and Waller. We'll see what happens with Aguilar a little bit, but I think I prefer Waller a little bit more right now. And then I really just drop off to really the 4 and the 3K range, and a lot of those pieces will come into a play for sort of stacking. So I do think Ertz and Waller, if you can afford them, are fine. And I probably lean Waller at the top end a little bit more. Middle of the field for the Chargers has been a spot you can attack this year due to their linebacker injuries.
Waller is, he's a lot of people had him pegged for a breakout season, and he delivered. He's been fantastic. I'm not the biggest Derek Carr guy, but he has really been, a blanket target. We know Tyrell Williams more over the top, but Waller is that guy who can attack the Chargers in the middle of the field. And although they've got, having Derwin James helps and having some of these guys back helps, I still think he's in a pretty good spot. We'll have to see what the deal is with the Eagles, in terms of Aguilar. Obviously, Alshon not there. Ertz, honestly, I'm not going to lie. I mean, 10 targets is a lot, but I thought he could have got the Julio treatment in some flows last week of just seeing like 15 to 20 targets with the lack of options. But they've done a pretty good job of having Sanders and Goddard and Ward and other players take some of that burden. So I think I'm with you. I actually lean Waller over Ertz in a 1v1 if I had to choose.
Yeah, that's how I lean too. And just for parts of that game, it's what you saw really at the beginning of the year. And it's sort of a concern and not something I thought as much would happen against Washington, but Ertz was just getting double teamed in that game. And that's what kind of led to a little bit more Ward opening up for his somewhat bigger of a day and multiple receptions. So yeah, that's an issue if you go forward with Dallas here. They double teamed him, I believe, earlier in the season. So if you're not going to have any supporting cast, and really just Aguilar is the question mark there, it could be frustrating. He still had 10 targets, but he only converts on 5 of those for receptions. So I think that's something to monitor moving forward, and probably something I'll look more into, how often Washington was double teaming him.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If they bracket him as teams have done, there's really nothing, Wentz will go elsewhere, and that's a killer. I guess, that's the thing with just to bring it back to Lamar for a second, you mentioned Hollywood Brown. Mark Andrews is really, to me, the only other way you can get, if you don't run him naked, that's the other way to go. I don't think I'll get there a ton, to be honest. Him and Jared Cook, I guess you can make a case, but for me, it'll probably be one of the top two, or I'll pay down into the 4K range. Do you want to mention Andrews or Cook, or do you want to just jump down to the 4Ks?
Yeah, I'm good to jump down. I think Andrew's price point is a little bit steep, and you're not even getting the 50 to 55% snaps out of him now. You're lucky to get like 35, 40. So it's just, he's still running those routes a little bit less than usual, and now he's priced up.
Yep. And yeah, they have three, Boyle and Hurst are either not Andrews, but they're not terrible either.
Yeah.
So there we go. We've got, it's amazing that I have to mention this Hollister guy, because Arizona actually is the worst of all time here. You have him, you have Hooper, Doyle, Hunter Henry, Goddard. To me, I will go back to Jack Doyle. I know it was bad last night, but Ebron not being there, I think helps. And at home against Carolina, he could work underneath, especially with Hilton's going to see tough coverage. That's my preferred of all these guys. But how do you rank them? Is there anyone that stands out?
Yeah, so I really want to see what happens if Evan Ingram can step on a football field. He's practiced in pretty much full the last week and a half to 2 weeks, and then everything seems positive for him to play. He was supposed to play 2 weeks ago on Monday Night Football. They said tentatively expected to. Goes all through practice last week, and then he just sits out. So he's 4,800 against Washington. I expect him to practice all week again, and it just comes down to how he's feeling at the end of the week. If he does go out there, he'll probably be one of the priorities for me on the slate at 4,800, with potentially the guy that he kind of had his career kind of shoot off with, Eli Manning at the helm. There's more of a chemistry there than with Daniel Jones if he was to return from the ankle. So I think I prioritize Ingram if he does suit up, but the rest of them are just going to be guys that I would be shocked if I got anything more than like 15% of, just 10%, 15 around there, of like Hunter Henry, Jack Doyle, Hooper, and those guys. Hollister not standing out as much for me. You've had it the last couple of weeks. Last week, RSJ scores 2 touchdowns. Nobody owns him for the Browns against Arizona, but all these main tight ends, whether it's Vance McDonald, he ended up getting hurt, and Njoku ended up being out. They were all priced up. You just don't get to see how it plays out. So this week you finally will with Hollister, as long as he stays healthy, but just not going to be a priority for me. In that 4K range, I think it's just small pieces of all these guys, and if Ingram suits up, I'll get some more. And then just in the 3K range, once we get there, I think there's some interesting names.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. And, tight end is something that I don't want to say I leave it last. It's not like defense in that sense, but I'll see. And you do have options. It's one of the few places where you can find, Higbee the last couple of weeks, it's been ridiculous, opens up a ton of salary. And there are some guys in the 3K range. Gesicki is another way to get Dolphins exposure. Is Njoku, I don't know what his deal is if he's inactive again. Other than that, though, what I want to ask you, and this is a question, what is your deal with Carolina right now? Ian Thomas is a name that I've seen chat mentioned for good reason. I see it says that Greg Olsen has cleared the concussion protocol. That's a situation I feel like we are going to have to monitor, obviously. If Olsen sits, do you like Thomas? If he plays, I assume that's a no-go for you?
Yeah, if Olsen plays, I wouldn't want Thomas. Thomas, though, been used great. Last week, he just doesn't get the targets. He still was running routes last week. He played 96% of the snaps. It was just a weird game where he didn't end up getting the 8 to 10 targets that he did the week before. But yeah, Olsen last week started practicing, but just was ruled out, didn't clear. Now he does clear, so I think he'll end up being back. And I do have interest in Olsen at the price point, but the concern there is just in how much chemistry is there. But naturally, tight ends should have a little bit more chemistry in the short to intermediate range with the new quarterback coming in. So I think Olsen's okay. And then the other name that I think I like a lot down here, and I wouldn't be surprised, depending on where ownership comes in, I don't think it'll be too high since he hasn't done much in a couple of weeks now, but we've already talked about this, the Cincinnati-Miami game. I mean, if it wasn't for fantasy or betting, it would be nothing. But right now it seems like a big interest of both of ours. But Gesicki at 3,600, I mean, he continues to get a lot of target share, and he's another guy you can get into a group of that game for 3,600. 8 targets last week. I mean, the least targets that this guy has seen over the last month and a half is 5. And for a $3,600 tight end, the ways that they use him is very impressive. 2 weeks ago, he had 2 red zone targets lined up outside wide as a wide receiver. So if I'm going to get 6, 7, 8 targets out of a guy who's 3,600, and Fitzpatrick seems to like throwing to him, probably the second most on this team, I do like that at 3,600.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out with Miami, and what a world. We spend probably the most time on Bengals, Dolphins. But, if Patrick Laird is going to cede some time to Gaskin, Gaskin is not the pass catcher that Laird is. And those targets are going to go to guys like Albert Wilson, Gesicki. Certainly, we know Parker's going to get his, but somebody else is going to have to step up if Laird is not going to be a guy that's getting a ton of targets out of the backfield. Now, he'll have some opportunities. But as you mentioned, Gesicki is holding firm at 5+ each and every week. I don't mind that. We'll have to see again. This is another Q tag guy, and it's protocol with concussion. If Vance McDonald is ruled out, Nick Vannett is 2,900. He saw 6 targets against the Bills, who are much stronger secondary than the Jets. I don't mind that as a pure punt. I'm certainly not going to prioritize him on a slate with 12 games, but I think you could go there if you want to save some salary.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I agree with that. And then just like final takes on like Gesicki and what's happening in Miami. So I think just end of the season, it makes more sense to get Gaskin more touches. Touched on it earlier. They spent the draft pick on him and nothing really on Laird, so there's some more incentive to get him on the field. But Laird is a very good pass protector. And what you had last week was a team in the Giants that had no pass rush. And now you have, once again, this week, the Bengals that have no pass rush. So, like, the need for him to stay on the field a lot more just isn't there. It's easier to put Gaskin on, who's not that great of a pass protector, because you just don't need that type of protection when these guys aren't getting to the quarterback.
No, and that's important. Like I said, it's a personnel, and obviously they have nothing to play for. I do think there's some incentive. I mean, look what the Panthers are doing. It's no surprise that they're saying, let's see what Greer can do. Why not? And there's elements of that, not just at quarterback across the league. So guys are going to get some chances. Someone like Gaskin, maybe that fits into their future plans, and that can benefit these other pass catchers. Other than that, though, I don't think it's, for me, there's no reason to dip any lower. You have guys up and down the slate at tight end in terms of price point, and I think no matter where your lineup construction falls, you'll have a couple of options to choose from no matter where it is.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's really no like super cheap tight ends this week in the 2K range, and I don't really think you need to get there. If for some reason Olsen doesn't suit it up, then Ian Thomas at 3,100 is probably the lowest I'd go.
Yeah, I'm like I said, for me, Thomas, Vannett, those are concussion protocol guys, and that's the thing. Last thing I'll say on that, and then we can bounce on out of here with some final thoughts. When it's concussion, you don't have to worry about, like with Evan Ingram. I'll have to see if he's on a pitch count or something. Like Greg Olsen, he either plays or he doesn't. I don't know. You don't really ease people back from a concussion. If you clear protocol, you're good to go. If not, you're completely out. So make sure you distinguish what kind of injury these guys are dealing with before we get into lineup construction.
Yeah, I agree. I think that just having 2 less games on the slate and the way that DraftKings priced it, I think it'll be a little bit looser of pricing, so you can do a lot. You can get different pretty easily.
Oh yeah, it's only 11. I've been saying in my mind it was 12 games. That's fake news. There's a Sunday night game. Anything else that you want to get to? I guess I wanted to ask you, because who knows, we may never do a show again. What is your general thought with defenses? Do you prefer to pay down? Do you let pricing dictate it? I know we were talking before the show how honestly it's such a stupid part of lineup building. Do you have a general approach? Or you just take it slate by slate?
Yeah, so I think generally slate by slate, and if there was a general approach for me, it would just usually be I really do hover below the $3,000 range. But we saw it last week, and then just looking this week early, DraftKings has pretty much said, all right, like any decent pass rush or any home favorite, for the most part, we're going to be pricing you up to $3,000 or above. It's interesting though this week because you have just a ton of terrible defenses facing a ton of terrible teams. You have the Giants versus Washington, Cincinnati versus Miami. So can they catch a break and actually have some sort of defensive score because their opponent is just that bad? Maybe, but there's a lot of bad just pass rushes down in this below $3,000 range. I think the Saints do stand out. So usually I'm trying to pay down for a home favorite, somebody with a pass rush. But for the most part, it really depends on the slate. Like last week, I was just paying up and it seemed like out of necessity to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things you can look for, and then you roll the dice. Pass rush, bad quarterbacks like, that are going to be throwing, that are risk takers. Jameis comes to mind, of course. People I'm sure will try to pick on Will Grier, and I get that. Maybe some bad weather. I had some Chiefs defense for that reason against Drew Lock in Arrowhead. But for the most part, that's all you can do. And then the Vikings get 7 turnovers, and most likely you lose. That's how it rolls with defense. But we're going to bounce on out of here. Any final thoughts for this Tuesday NFL strategy show?
No, I think that's it. I think just popping up, having Twitter open right here. Recent report out of Tampa Bay is that Chris Godwin probably not going to play, and Jameis Winston walked up to OJ Howard and Cam Brate and said, "Hey, you guys are getting the rock this week." So it's from Tampa Bay's beat writer. So if you're in season long, or I think, do they play Saturday? Yeah, they play Saturday. So that's Saturday slate stuff. I'll load up on your Tampa Bay tight ends.
Oh boy, that is going to be fun with 3 games and 30% OJ Howard, and then he gets 0. I can already know how my weekend's going to go, but that will be fun, and we will have content. I want to say again, so stay tuned. Obviously, if you haven't signed up, we'd love to have you as part of the community and Slack. Sal's always in there. I'm in there. Plenty of other, of course, experts, including Alex himself. So you can use the promo code NFL Strategy. You get 50% off, and we've got plenty of deals coming for the holidays. If anyone has any questions, get in contact with us and hit that thumbs up button on the way out. We're going to bounce on out of here. There will be shows throughout the day, mostly NBA and NHL. But good luck, everyone. Sal, thanks for letting me hop on with you. Week 16. Hope someone takes something down, and we'll be back next week, week 17. Good luck.